What's up guys, welcome back to another video. Today we have a pretty sweet project. We're making a little bit more body armor for my Jeep. After my last Rocks and Valleys trip a couple weeks ago, I realized I really want some better protection down in my rocker area. So let's go take a look at what we got planned today. So right here are a set of factory rock sliders taken off from a 2022 Chevy Colorado ZR2. I scored these things for dirt cheap, so I figured why not snatch them up and see if we can make them fit the Jeep. Obviously, every single bracket on here is going to have to be cut off and modified to be able to go onto the Jeep. But one other thing is these are about a foot too long, which means I'm going to have to cut a section out of the middle of each rock slider and smush them back together and re-weld them. So that is definitely going to be the most complicated part of this. But since I got them for such a good price, I think it's going to be worth the effort to make these fit in comparison to $600, $800 that I would spend for a different set. So I just went ahead and propped these up on some jack stands just to show you guys, and you can clearly see that these are going to be way too long. They're not centered by any means, but you can see easily sticks over 6 to 8 inches in the front, and basically the same amount here. But because these are already assembled rock sliders, I obviously can't just cut off one end because we would just have open tube. So I got to cut out a section from the middle here, squish it together, and then re-weld it so we have one complete rock slider again. But I'm thinking I'll probably go pretty close to the same length of these factory rock sliders just to get the best protection I can. So I went ahead and took some measurements really quick just to kind of get an idea, and the stock sliders are roughly 68 inches. So I think that's a goal I'm going to shoot for. That was actually a little bit short, so I think 68 is going to be a good number to get the most protection possible, but then kind of just keep it away from the wheel wells a bit. But then the ZR2 sliders are basically exactly 7 feet, around 84 inches, so definitely gonna have to cut out a good chunk there. But first things first, I'm gonna go ahead and get all of the factory brackets cut off from these sliders so we can actually start working with them a little better. All right, all the brackets are finally all cut off and ground down smooth, this one and that one. So now I'm at the point where I got to figure out where I want to cut these. Originally I was thinking I would just cut it in the middle, but I feel like it might be best if I do it more to one side, maybe like the back over here, where if I were to end up with any sort of weak point from the weld, not that I expect that to be the case, but if that were, it at least moves it back to where it's not centered at technically the weakest point of the rock reel, because this is closer to the mounting point on the Jeep. Then I also have to figure out how exactly I want to cut these. What I would like to do is just throw these in a chop saw with a metal blade and get some perfectly straight cuts just here, and boom, done. That would by far be the easiest solution. But since I don't have that, usually what I use is just cut off wheel and cut through everything. But given the shape of these and the fact that it's already 2 tubes connected with a plate, I think it's going to be super difficult trying to make that cut with a cutoff wheel and get it even remotely straight. And it's also just going to take a lot of time. But I think it might at least be worth trying. So that's probably what we're going to do as soon as we figure out where we want to take that chunk out. Alright guys, these things are pretty much ready to go together. I have them cut down to length. Both of them are set equal. and I have the edges cleaned up. I can't get down in there, so I'm probably gonna have to throw a wire brush on, try and get that small gap in the middle. But aside from that, it's basically ready to weld back together. It actually wasn't quite as difficult as I thought to get these things cut down to length. It's just super time consuming and just annoying to do overall, but it's done. So basically ready to weld them up. But then looking at my factory rock rails here, now that I've pulled one of them off, they're actually a bit more beefy than I thought. I think they could be mounted a little bit stronger, but aside from that, the bracketry and the actual tube itself isn't really that thin. But I'm actually kind of considering taking these sliders and welding them directly on to this tube here, and I can just run some stitch welds across. And I feel like that's actually gonna make this thing pretty strong. It's gonna just add a whole lot more bracing to this factory slider, and it's gonna kick out these ones a bit more like I wanted. Originally what I was going to do is cut this one off and reuse the stock brackets, but then later on I'm planning on tying in some more mounts, maybe to the unibody, or add some bolts along the pinch seam. But for now, I was going to just use the factory mounts just for time's sake. But one thing that I realized I actually really like about these is it has this guard that goes along the entire pinch seam, and you don't really get that just by adding a tube slider there. So I really like the idea of kind of just welding these other sliders right over top of it. And then with that pinch seam guard that's there, I can very easily make extra mounts in the future that goes off from that connects to the frame or to the pinch seam. It's starting to get pretty dark out, but I went ahead and just ground powder coat off the whole backside of both of these, just to get it ready so we can start welding. I'm gonna have to do the same thing on that rail, but then there's a couple things I want to do to this stock rock rail just to make the fitment a little bit better first. Alright guys, we have all of the surfaces that need to be welded cleaned up. I have a sleeve inside for reinforcement, so I have something to weld to, and also just to help keep everything aligned in the process. So I think we're at the stage we can actually start getting all the angles set, the position set on here, and start getting stuff welded up. I still want to clean up these brackets a little bit, but I want to make sure I have the welding done tonight, and I can clean up the brackets after all this welding is done. So I'm not too worried about that. I just want to get everything cleaned up before I paint. So hopefully we can get this all welded up tonight, get everything set to where it is ready to go on the Jeep, and then get a coat of paint put on them, and tomorrow morning should be dry enough. We'll get these things mounted up. so we just got all of the half 13 rivet nuts installed. I went ahead and replaced everything because the factory hardware is just these little kind of nut clips that were in there, and while I was getting everything mocked up, one of them stripped out. So I figured that was a good opportunity to upgrade the hardware. So we went all the way up to a 1/2 inch bolt. I used rivet nuts just to go into the holes. I know that's not ideal, but it's definitely a much better upgrade compared to what it was. And then I also added a couple tack welds to it. Now that everything is fully installed, I'm actually going to add a couple more tacks, but that was kind of just planning ahead, and I just figured I would hate sometime down the road if I am removing these or putting them back on and one of the rib nuts decides to start spinning inside the metal. That'd be super annoying to try and have to remove that at that point. So I figured if I go ahead and add some tack welds to it, it at least just holds it in place and is another measure to help resist spinning in the future. And then it also just adds a lot more rigidity to it. So that's kind of why I did that. And originally I was actually trying to install these manually, which is essentially you thread a bolt into it with a nut and a washer and then crank down on the nut and that will squish them down. But trying to crush 1/2 inch rivet nuts by hand was actually a super huge pain, and like my whole body was sore just after trying to do 4 of them. So I went ahead and bought a rivet nut tool from Amazon, and I just got the one that had the best reviews and came with the half 13 attachment for it, and that thing was such a lifesaver. I wish I just had that from the beginning because I did all of them in the same amount of time that it took me to do the 4 manually, and the ones I did manually didn't turn out that great because it's super hard to hold everything steady. So now that I got that tool, everything is fully installed. So I'm gonna actually go ahead and add a couple more tacks to them, and then basically we're ready at this point to go ahead and mock up the sliders, make sure everything fits, and I pretty much have everything ready for paint as well. So as soon as I confirm that these things fit, we're gonna go get everything painted up. Alright guys, it is finally that time. The rock sliders are complete and fully bolted onto the Jeep. I'm super excited. Everything went out pretty good. I had to do a little bit of a clearancing just because going up in the bolt size, I had a little bit less tolerance within the holes. So a couple times I had to just clearance out for being able to get a socket onto the larger head size for the bolt. But aside from that, everything went up great. The paint came out pretty good. It was essentially like freezing last night, so the paint isn't super dry and cured like I would like it to be, but it was dry enough. We got them on the Jeep, and I think they look sweet. Let's check them out. Making these rock sliders, there were a lot of decisions and factors to consider. While rock sliders absolutely can make a Jeep look cooler, and I completely agree that they do, I really wanted to make sure these things were as functional as possible. I'm a huge advocate for looking at the resources available to me and figuring out what I can do to make them better. I knew that if I wanted these rock sliders to not just look like rock sliders, but work as rock sliders too, there had to be some compromises. The main reason I did this upgrade in the first place was simply lack of side protection. The factory rails looked nice, but the only form of protection they had to offer was only directly below the Jeep. In reality, these WJs are big and round. I'm sure we've all seen a WJ with some beat up lower door sills. Now, I could have put a really steep angle on these sliders to give them a super sleek look, but laying them out to be nearly flat, I was able to locate the outer tube to be just wider than the widest part of the body, offering the best side protection. I also could have welded these on a couple inches higher to be right up snug to the rocker panel, but lowering them down to be flush with the factory Overland rail, I effectively doubled the surface area on the bottom, meaning all impacts need to get through both tubes simultaneously. Alright guys, there we have it. We now have some custom bolt-on retrofit rock sliders utilizing the factory bolt locations that come on all of these Jeeps. We now have upgraded half-inch grade 8 hardware all around, making these things much more sturdy. Let me know in the comments what you guys think of these. I actually think they turned out great. The looks, I was a little bit hesitant on it at first. I wasn't sure when I thought about it, but now that everything's painted the same color, I actually love the way these things came out. I think they look super legit, and the best part is anyone could bolt these things right into their Jeep the way that they are. If I were to sell these right now, the next guy could easily slap these right into their Jeep. I love an opportunity to try something that has never been done before, and I think we demonstrated that with these rock sliders right here. I love it when I get to work with what I have. Whenever given the opportunity, I will always see what I can do to make my own stuff before I go and buy an aftermarket option, and I think this was very much worth it. But yeah, I'm super curious. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think about these rock sliders that I just built here. Like this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.